Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our annual industry update. What is new in the industry and what to expect for this year? We're so happy to have you guys here, and I'm thrilled to have my partner in crime, Phil Vaccaro, join us, and I'll introduce Phil in just a moment. Phil and I work together some throughout the year, but I think this is, he always corrects me, 6th or 7th of our 8 years doing our shift conference, that Phil has helped me open the event with what the Hinge team believes and sees is going on in the industry by way of the many business owners we coach and teach and value and sell and mentor every year, and the research that Phil and his team do on behalf of the industry. So coming to you guys with what we see, what we hear, what we expect to come for the next year. So as we go through the presentation, please add your questions to the chat bar. We are going to, over to the right of your screen, we will save time to take your questions. This is a huge crowd, y'all. You guys broke our system. We had our system ready for 500. We had to go to 1,000. That just makes me so happy. I saw the names this morning. I just got a good heart feel with all the special people I saw along the way. So that was fantastic. Also, we're going to have some initial polls that you will see polls also to the right. We're going to gather a little information from you guys, because even Phil and I have a little confusion that we're talking about, and I'll explain that. I'd love to introduce you to somebody that's become a special friend to me after we met when we spoke at a symposium in New York on the state of the industry of all things. And Phil Vaccaro, thanks so much for joining me here, as you did last year, as you did every year at Shift. And I'm thrilled to have you. Could you just say a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at EY-Parthenon?
Yeah, I'd love to, Kathy, and always appreciate the invitation to join you. Phil Vaccaro, a partner at EY-Parthenon. We are sort of the strategy consulting arm of the broader EY family, and we try to take a very data-driven approach to our work in supporting the market. We work from a variety of different entry points in the early childcare space. We work with states in designing public pre-K systems. We work directly with companies, providers in the space on strategic issues. We work with investors through various diligence exercises. And, we have been active in the space for a long time now. And first Shift conference, Kathy, was officially, I think, February 2020 in Miami. And we've been happy to continue our partnership with you over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. That was our 3rd event. So you're a regular Hinge person now, Phil. We're never letting you go. But we love the work that the team at EY-Parthenon does on behalf of the industry, and have really appreciated our collaboration around how we support our clients better, what we believe to be happening in the industry, and how do we convert that into support for people who are trying to do really good work and important things in the industry. So I appreciate that partnership and you joining us, Phil. So here's our format for today, everyone. The first thing is that Phil and I have 4 survey questions. And as we do the survey, I'm going to explain the questions and the reason for the questions in advance. We want to share some granular information with you guys. Then I'm going to present some information on what the Hinge team hears and believes. We're going to turn it over to Phil for some data-driven information that Phil has collected. We'll come back together for some questions. So I see you guys are popping in a few. The team will help you out with some of those. So first poll, and we'll let our poll pop up, that we would love for you guys to help us out with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we chose these questions as we go through. So the first question is, how does your revenue at this time last year compare to what your revenue was this time last year? And the reason that Phil and I chose the specific questions we're asking with you guys is that I have been sharing the message with the world that demand is very high. So I had a learning. What I learned is that demand, revenue, and enrollment aren't necessarily all the same thing. To me, demand has historically been synonymous with enrollment and therefore revenue. And so what the Hinge team mainly focuses on is revenue. The reason for that is we're valuing companies, and that's the basis of the company value. So we started to hear very different experiences from business owners, as did Phil. So Phil and I kind of collaborated, and we thought, okay, well, maybe there's some differences, and maybe the right question isn't just how is demand. So as we move into the second question, the results of this question are that it's close to even. You know, it's not a huge disparity, but a clear winner that revenue is higher for most people. I have some theories around that I'll present in my information coming up. For another group, it's lower, and for some, it's about the same. So thank you for those responses. So revenue is interesting. The second question that we would like to present to you guys is, what is happening with enrollment? And you would ordinarily think enrollment follows revenue, but there are actually some logical reasons that those two things could be different. For instance, if you're like some people and you have had higher than average tuition rate increases since COVID, that might be a reason that you're serving less children, but your revenue is higher. Which in my, accounting, wanting you to be financially healthy brain is not a bad thing. So that would serve to say some expenses are lower, you're serving less children, however, your revenue's higher. So for the majority of people, enrollment is lower. This is more balanced, so we have almost a third, which is interesting, with a slight advantage in that enrollment is lower, some experiencing that enrollment is the same, and some experiencing that it's higher. Okay, so enrollment and revenue might not always necessarily be the same. So it looks like if we had to, again, there's some, they're about equally weighted, but if we just chose the higher number, we would say so far that revenue is higher and enrollment is low. Enrollment is lower. Interesting. Okay, now the third market, and Phil, you jump in here anytime you want. I see you. We're thinking really hard about this because Phil and I have a lot of conversations about this. Okay, so the next question we want to ask is, how do you feel demand is trending? And the way demand is different is, in your experience, how does families who need services, which don't always translate into enrollments for various reasons, but how do you feel industry demand is? Do you feel like parents want more of the services that we offer than they did a year ago? Do you feel like it's about the same as it was a year ago? Do you feel like it's lower than it was a year ago? So again, we're thinking we have to think differently about revenue, what is happening with enrollment, and how do you measure that? So let me pause right there. We're realizing that there's a disparity in how people measure enrollment. Is enrollment heads in the building? Is it an FTE weighted average with full-time counted as one enrollment and part-time counted as a half, or some type of weighted average? That could be a factor in the numbers we hear on enrollment that might not really give a good picture of revenue or demand. And so what we're feeling like here is that we feel like there's less demand. So that's really interesting. So the majority of people have higher revenue, lower enrollment, and lower demand. What that jump in.
I think this is really fascinating, Kathy. Some similarities in the enrollment demand responses, but revenue is certainly, it's good to see that revenue for more folks than not is trending positively. I think this just emphasizes sort of the diverse experiences that folks are having in the market, and we always talk about early childcare being a very sort of localized business, and certainly is. And so, when we think about the number, the variety of factors that are influencing demand, whether it is, presence of public pre-K, or whether it is demographic, migration trends within the country, there's 5, 6, 7 factors that can shape the industry in different ways. And I think what we're seeing is that, depending on what folks' local context is, there's really some real differences in the way that they're experiencing the market right now.
Interesting. Thank you for that. That's an interesting perspective. Also, the Hinge team will, I'll report on the Hinge news that there have been record tuition rate increases, also record reduction of discounting, which is something that we really coach people on. So I think where we could be collectively experiencing lower demand that converts into lower enrollment, we might be more profitable. So that was the confusion for the Hinge team, that we're valuing companies that are more profitable than they were the last 3 years or even before COVID. So again, a learning for me, that doesn't necessarily mean that demand is high and that enrollment is high, but it certainly means that revenue and hopefully net income is higher. So one more poll, which is, so this was a question that Phil and I had as we were talking about enrollment and demand. We have a wondering if some providers are enrolling more part-time students than they did before. And is that a reason we're reporting higher enrollment and we're using more head count method than FTE method? That was a wondering. I also wonder if some schools are accepting less part-time students because that makes the teacher's life a little easier and more predictable for the student. So this is interesting, with a clear majority says it's about the same. So Phil, I really feel like that we should find a way to collect more data regularly with more defined questions that are far beyond just what is happening with your demand. So this was super helpful, I think, in the conversation that we're about to have. So thank you, everyone, for that. Any other things you noticed, Phil?
Yeah, well, I'm particularly interested in the response to this question. So it looks like on balance, folks are experiencing less part-time than more part-time enrollment. And, as we think through, the affordability challenge for families, one thing that we've been wondering is, well, does that translate into higher demand for part-time arrangements? Now, it doesn't, this is not necessarily reflective of the demand, it's what sort of centers are willing to accommodate. So that's, a slight nuance on that specific question. But but this is helpful to see that there has not been a huge shift toward part-time, at least from the folks on the phone, on the call.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, again, because the business has always been a complex business. It is not getting easier. The mix of part-time students, it can be challenging. It can certainly be challenging for teachers, and to add more of that into the mix can be difficult. So that makes sense. So okay, well, thank you so much for that. Again, you guys jump in on your questions as we go throughout this process. I will share some information from the HINGE team. We'll then turn it back over to Phil, who will share some data from EY-Parthenon, and then we'll come back together to take your questions. And again, feel free to put those in as you go. So some industry trends we see on the HINGE side. So revenue is high. You see, I already learned. So I realized in recent conversations that I needed to really be specific about what I was talking about. So what we believe, based on the companies we see, mentor, talk to, ask questions of, value, sell, all the companies we're involved in, is that there has been an increase in revenue. Here are things we hear: that a lot of business owners believe that families have an increased awareness and desire for early education for their children. So there's a growing knowledge among parent bases about how important not just care, not just socialization is, but education for their preschoolers. We've seen a cost of living increase that's necessitated two workers in the family, which is a little more stressful than it used to be. Also, we have seen tuition rates increase. I think my data on tuition rate increases is 25, I have a slide in a minute, 25 to 35% reportedly on average from our clients since COVID. And the removal of the majority of discounts, except staff discounts, do not mess with that. Do not take anything away from your staff right now. But we report regularly on trends on discounting, and reach out if you have more questions about that, which ones are still popular, which ones you might consider removing, either in conjunction with a smaller tuition rate increase or instead of. Also, one more thing, because I can't help but be preachy about this, be sure that in your billing system, you're billing the stated revenue and you're applying a discount so you know the effect of your decisions around discounting. I call it the industry's most difficult hidden danger, because most business owners charge the discounted rate. They have no idea how much they're discounting in different areas. So we believe that revenue is higher. You guys confirm that, if we can count on this group to be a representative of the whole. Also, as we saw, demand does not always convert into occupancy. So there is definite reported pricing fatigue. So we reached the limit, where the industry would historically increase tuition rates 3 to 5% a year to keep up with cost of living changes. They were reported at more like 8 to 12% in the post-COVID years up until 24, and sometimes more than once a year. So because we had salaries increase 30 to 50% since COVID, there's no way for you to stay in business without right-siding the financial model, which was really difficult. In January of 24, we saw most companies revert back to their original 3 to 5%. So our clients report on average that they increased tuition rates 22 to 30%, 32% since COVID. Now, companies who serve a subsidy population were challenged even more, because There's a limit to how much they can charge above what subsidy pays if they're even able to do that. So in some states, you're not even able to charge the difference. Some business owners choose not to because of either competition that doesn't, or that families genuinely can't go to a higher tuition rate. Also, pre-K competition is situational, but we're hearing it. This is not new. We have talked about this for 20 years. What I mean by situational is a certain school district will need to fill some classrooms, so open some free pre-K classes, and 3s and 4s are at risk in private situations. We are hearing more of it. It's still situational, so there will be a pocket of it. Be prepared though. Have your game plan on what you will do. It very often happens really quickly, right before school starts, right at the beginning of the year, and you need to pivot to other age groups quickly. So develop strategies around that. Also, we see big wait lists in infant and toddler populations, and I know that, doesn't align with some other research. We hear it constantly. So because of that, and because infants were historically a loss leader in our industry, more providers are right-siding that tuition rate, which is easier to do, to set it at the correct rate where you can make a reasonable profit for reinvestment into the business. For enrollment that's just entering your system, it's harder if they've been with you a year or two to do a huge increase. So we've seen more businesses try not to lose money there because our most profitable programs, which are 3 and 4-year-olds, are at times and very quickly drawn out of our system. So that's what we see on the demand versus occupancy question. Operational trends. So here's some things that we see going on in operations. First of all, staffing. Always been our industry's biggest challenge, right? So we have seen elimination of discounting except for staff. Again, this is the time to do more for your staff. We heard a reported slight easing of hiring in the fall of 23. So we're now a little past a year into that. Salaries have been reported to have increased 30 to 50% since 2020. So when that happens and they are 40 to 50% salaries only, not total staff costs, but salaries only, 50%, 40 to 50% of every dollar of parents pay, there's no way that dollar can be the same anymore. So that is the main reason for the historic tuition rate increases. Hiring and retention strategies are critical. They used to be a market a competitive advantage, not anymore. They're necessary. You have got to invest there. We saw and continue to see a big shift of marketing dollars from enrollment-driven strategies to hiring strategies. And then we hear a reported declining quality of the available workforce, which nobody's fault. It's just what it is. What it requires is for you to invest more heavily in training programs, credentialing, mentoring within your own school, and career paths. So heavy investment there is necessary. Next slide, please. A couple of other things to mention. Insurance challenges are crazy. Also, don't wait until it happens to you. Many companies losing their insurance, historic increases. I love the work of Samantha Phillips in helping business owners, if you want her contact messages, in helping business owners control the narrative with their insurance company. What I mean by that is create a book of all the things you're doing. Don't wait till there's an incident. Don't wait till you get a bill that's something you can't absorb. control the narrative, tell your insurance company what you're doing. We're seeing camera systems more important in insurance rates. So learn the things that make your insurance more stable. More challenging licensing situations than before. I don't have a real prediction on what that's related to, but we are hearing it reported. We're seeing a lot of value in partnering with other stakeholders. And what I mean by that, if the school district is doing a pre-K program, we have clients who are in the school providing that program for their benefit. Head Start got more funding. Be the Head Start partner in your area and do a Head Start class in your building. Follow the money trail. Build relationships now for what might happen 2 years from now. You cannot build a relationship in a crisis. Start now. More important placed on your school's branding. We love the work of Better Beans Branding. Also message us if you want their contact. I mentioned technology and also specialty curriculum, things like language immersion, Montessori Reggio, specialty areas of curriculum to either focus on or add into your curriculum to help drive demand. And that's an area that parents are really interested in now. Transactional trends. So we have had just a increase for the last 8-ish years in the interest from investors and buyers into the industry. So they're not scared away, guys. They are happy to enter an industry, invest, bring value, help the company get stronger. We bring investors in for larger companies all the time to fund their growth. It's just tremendous interest that has continued for many years. We see business values have been stable. They increased pretty dramatically for a while. They've normalized, which is great. For the last 2 years, probably, we have also seen a slight increase in real estate values since interest rates have started to drop slightly. So we did see cap rates increase over the interest rate period. Still not fully back to where they were pre-COVID, but improving. And then this is a big one, very big continued complexity of deal structure, diligence, and process. So running processes has gotten much more complicated. That's okay. You know, we can step up with resources on that. The HINGE team alone has added 5 team members in the past year to help support our clients through their processes because it's getting more difficult, but we're doing it and it's going well. So happy with that investment. So I will, I believe, turn it over to Phil. Oh, no, I got one more. I'm so sorry. So here's what we're hearing. Here's what most people are thinking for 2025. Increased greenfield growth. So there's more bright and shiny new coming to your area. Just know that that's coming. Building costs are high, but it is not slowing people down. We're seeing increased opportunities for acquisition. There are people who are either weary of the complexity of the business, they're getting to retirement age, they, for various reasons. There is no lack of opportunity for you to acquire solid companies to add into your portfolio. There are equally people selling to capitalize on the stable and higher than usual business values. Operational complexity, I mentioned. We have more people launching proprietary leadership and training programs in an attempt to answer the staffing issues. And we have seen more opportunity for tech-based businesses that make it easier to run your business, easier to get insurance, easier to convince licensing that you have a a business that's being run efficiently. So much greater investment in tech-based businesses. So I think that's my cue now, to turn it over to Phil for some content from Phil, and then I will jump back in at the end, and we'll take some questions, Phil. All you.
Thank you, Kathy. That was really great. So we're going to dig in a little bit now in terms of what some of the trends are that may be impacting demand in the sector. So first few slides are going to be based on data that is published by the US Census. So, if we look across the US and the population of kids that factor into early childcare, the US 0 to 5 population is 1 million children smaller than it was in 2016. And there are also differences by age group due to the COVID effect. So if you look at the chart on the left, we were running pretty steady at about 20.2, 20.3 million students or children aged 0 to 5. This excludes 5-year-olds enrolled in kindergartens. This is, really sort of the true ECE population here. Running pretty consistently around that 20.2 range. And then during COVID, you can see that the number dipped into 19.4, 2021, 19.2, 2022, and down to 18.9 in 2023. So that's a pretty substantial change in a short period of time. And if we look at on the right, the population of children for each age, and we showed this slide this chart at the Shift conference, but the way to read this chart, in 2020, you had effectively 3.7 million children aged 0 to 5 who were born, and those children are now 4 years old. In 2021, you had many fewer children who were born, so these are the 3-year-olds now, and the number was closer to 3.5, 3.58 in terms of the number of children born. That has increased again over 2022, 2023, 2024. You can see steady increases year over year, and we are returning to more of sort of an equilibrium point. But that 2021 year in particular was a challenging one in terms of birth rates, and that is, we believe, impacting demand for early childcare in the moment. If we look at the next slide, this data is also from the US Census, and looking at the childcare arrangements for children aged 0 to 5. And I think there's really two interesting things on this slide, maybe three. One is if we focus on the dashed box for a second, we can see that participation in organized care on a percentage basis is consistent from 2016 to 2023. So percentage of kids enrolled in private ECE centers, 15%, all of the locations, 11%, public schools, 6%, but effectively 32% of kids in organized care. That's sort of the first point. The second point is when you take the same percentage on a lower number, the total number of children in private ECE care has gone down. So that is the 3 million to 2.8 million, so 200,000 kids. The third thing that's interesting, I think, on this slide is, and I saw a comment in the chat that alluded to this, is the percentage increase of children who are in a parent care only arrangement. And that has increased from 40% in 2016 to 45% in 2023. And that really came out of the relative care and non-relative care buckets, but more of these informal settings. So some important trends to think about from a childcare arrangement standpoint. When you unpack that on the next slide and look at that by age group, we show the less than 1-year-old population on the left, the 1 to 2 population in the middle, and the 3 to 5 population on the right. You can see that decrease has come entirely from the 3 to 5-year-old segment. So if you look over to the right-hand side here, the percentage of kids in that bottom slice there, private ECE, has gone down from 19% to 17%. It's held steady in the 1 to 2 year olds, actually up 1%, and it's increased by 2% at the less than 1 year old. So Kathy talks about sort of the demand among the younger children seems to still be there. From the standpoint of the 3 to 5, it's taken a hit. And you can see also here, in that 3 to 5 year old segment, the 2 bars on the right, that top segment, which is the parent care only, has increased from 26% to 33%. So, but roughly a quarter of the kids in the 3 to 5 year old bucket were served by parent care only in 2016. That has gone up to 33%. So 1 out of every 4 to 1 out of every 3. It's a pretty big difference in a short period of time. And, part of this may be that these were kids who were born during COVID. They weren't immediately enrolled in a early child care center like maybe they would have been historically, and then maybe just never enrolled at all in one of these early child care centers. So pretty big difference there. If we go to the next slide, it's also interesting to note from a supply standpoint, the leading ECE providers have increased their capacity by 3% a year since 2015. It's about 180,000 seats. Now, some of that is through acquisition, some of that is through greenfield. So not all necessarily net new supply, but certainly some net new supply reflected in those figures. Then we're going to just end here with a little bit of a discussion on cost, which Kathy certainly mentioned in her comments. So cost has increased in importance since 2019 for parents who are considering different forms of care. And this data comes from NCES, the National Household Education Surveys Program. And the question on the left is addressing the percent of parents selecting cost as very important to their care arrangement selection, the difference between 2019 and 2023. And so for every single child care arrangement, so relative care, non-relative care, center-based care, multiple arrangements, the cost sensitivity has increased. Now it's increased more for families who have choose relative care, non-relative care, or multiple arrangements. The group that is the least price sensitive is the folks who are in center-based care. Not to say that they're not price sensitive, but they are still enrolling their center-based care with about the same level of consideration for price. And if you look at the right-hand side, price sensitivity has increased pretty much across the board for different income segments. So this chart on the right is segmented based on household income. And so, you can see for the 20 to 50,000 group, 50,000 to 75,000, and 75,000 to 100,000, each of those household income buckets increased by at least 10 percentage points in terms of selecting cost is very important to their care arrangement. For folks who a little bit on the higher end of the income spectrum, greater than 100,000, has also increased in terms of price sensitivity, but not necessarily to the same extent, which we would typically see. But it is important to note that for all of these income segments, price has become a more important consideration in the child care selection decision. So, Kathy mentioned this sort of 22 to 32% range in terms of a cost increase in aggregate over the last 4 or 5 years. So if we go to the next slide, just in terms of what that means. So this last slide is intended to be entirely illustrative. If we can flip to the next slide. Thank you. So in 2019, on the left-hand side, the median household income was about 69,000, and the average, if we just take an annual tuition cost of 12,500, which reflects about a $250 per week cost for childcare, that was about 18% of household income. It would cost about 18% of household income to put your child in sort of full-time early child care over the course of a year. Now, median household income has gone up by about 4% a year between 2019 and 2023. So that's how you get from median household income here of 68.7 thousand to 80.6 thousand. So that has been a steady increase, and it's not to say the 4% is distributed equally by year, but on average, if you smooth that out, it's been a 4% increase. If you've been increasing your price at 5%, 7%, 10% a year, you are taking the cost to your families is taking up a greater share of their overall household income. So if you've been increasing tuition at 5% per year, that's sort of an aggregate of 20% over those 4-year period. The cost to the family has gone up from 18% of their household income to 19%. We would say that's probably on the low end of what has happened from a price standpoint over the last few years. If it's more of the 7% annual tuition growth, which is more in the 30% aggregate change since 2019, now you're talking about 21% of household income. And if you're on the high end, 10% annual growth, this is probably, in aggregate, closer to 45, 50%, which is a pretty significant change. Now you're talking about 23% of household income. So, and we know that there are other items that have sort of increased in price relative to household income or the industry or the economy-wide inflation rate over time. So we are seeing how childcare become a more expensive proposition to families as a result of the price increases that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years. So, a number of really interesting data points, all from publicly available data that sort of speak to some of the dynamics that are happening right now with, on the demand side as well as on the supply side. And, we are always sort of looking at these data sources. What are they telling us about the market? There's a really interesting report released just yesterday from Line Leader that talks about sort of conversion rates and inquiry rates and really sort of dissecting the funnel. That's really helpful, that we would recommend taking a look at. And, we're always just trying to look at this data in aggregate and try to piece together what it is telling us, particularly given that there are trends, both positive and headwinds and tailwinds affecting the market today. So those are the slides that we wanted to share with you, and we're happy to distribute these through Kathy.
Awesome. A couple of questions. I'll just go ahead, and I've been monitoring. You guys, if you are not just scanning the chat bar, please do that. There are some excellent comments. There's some great questions, but be sure and pick those up and learn about other people's experiences. There are a lot of great comments there. So a couple of housekeeping questions. One thing is that you will be able to scan a QR code at the end of this presentation to get the Hinge slides. We will put, Phil, you would like to get an email to provide your slides. So
you can just distribute them together, Kathy. That's great.
Yeah, okay. The team will do that and give you access to the slides. We are emailing you all a recording of this event tomorrow for anyone that didn't get a chance to watch it, or always we have someone, people who sign up and then they're not able to attend. So you will get that tomorrow. So a couple of questions just to tackle. Phil, weigh in here. We got the question about how grant monies weigh into valuations. So if you get one-time grants or, they're not consistent and expected into the future, those are removed from valuations. So investors' perception of the value of the company is the go forward cash flow. And so it's our job, of course, to present that in the best possible light. And one factor is anything that doesn't go into the future doesn't get valued. And so the bad news is that might be one-time grants. The good news is anything for you personally that will go away also gets removed We had a question about give examples of tech-based businesses. I think the big three for me are billing systems, camera systems, CR systems, while I'll add in parent communication systems. Do you have any others I didn't name, Phil? That sounds about right.
Yeah, no, those are good ones. We do think that in particular, the parent communication piece has increased significantly. It was noted actually in the line leader report, the differences with Gen Z families and how they receive information and the frequency with which they like to be communicated and how they like to be communicated. So I think that's a really important one.
Yeah, I'll echo that where that used to be a market differentiator is a necessity now. It doesn't make you special anymore. It always changes what makes me special now, and you want that, but it is not parent communication systems anymore. We got a question about, is this the way for-profits behave exclusively and not nonprofits? It's our experience that they both are experiencing the same thing and behave the same way. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Phil?
That's my impression, Kathy. It's not a segmentation that we look at typically, but I haven't heard anything to trends that are affecting them differently.
Okay. Thank you for that. We had a great question about return to office trends. So we heard very strongly in the immediate post-COVID years that there was the expectation that parents who were now working from home had gotten used to working with their children at home, especially in after-school populations. So there was the prediction that might impact after-school populations. We have not seen that broadly. I think that if you've ever tried to work with a preschooler or after-schooler at home, it's difficult. And then, of course, a lot of companies are now requiring the return to the office. There are some hybrid models which might necessitate a different strategy on part-time versus full-time. But we have not, we did not see a strong reaction in decrease in revenue based on that. And we haven't seen an increase either. So maybe that's coming, or maybe it's situational in certain areas. We certainly do hear it talked about. We also got a really good question that this sounds like pretty gloomy news. And I don't actually believe that, to be honest. I think that if you think about only demand, then it might sound pretty gloomy. So I think that was one thing that, like I said in the beginning, was a confusion for me for sure. I might have dragged Phil into that a little bit. But there was a disparity for me from what we saw in financial performance and what we heard about demand. So I think as we dig into that a little deeper, we're realizing that schools can have less demand and less enrollment, and at the same time, more revenue and more profitability. So we're seeing that happen. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. We are seeing some schools struggle. There are schools who have closed. There are schools who have struggled to right side that financial picture. So that certainly is happening. We are not seeing broad gloominess in the industry. I'm very optimistic about what we see. Phil, prediction from you around that?
Yeah, it's always tough to be in the prediction business. The one thing I will say on price is, in the short term, it's almost always going to be a more profitable proposition to take price. What that does over the long term, though, is sort of the question that we've been thinking more about. And how do you think about sort of your long-term price position relative to the market? And that's an important question to consider as you think about, how have you historically increased price relative to competitors in your area? Are you now in a place where you were toward the lower end of the market and now you're at the higher end because you've taken price more aggressively? Or maybe you were more toward the higher end and didn't take price as aggressively, and now you're more toward the lower end. And how, what kind of reflection does that have on your center, on your brand, and so on and so forth?
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Also, more good questions. Slides, will the slides be included in the email? Meredith just told me that was a question again. They will be uploaded directly to this page for attendees to download. Not sure I understand exactly what that means, Meredith. Please advise for us non-technical people. No, I don't know. That makes sense to you, Phil? I don't know.
I trust in Meredith.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure they're going to show up here in the next 5 minutes, 4 minutes. What do you mean by camera systems? Thank you for that question. Classroom cameras. There are also there's a debate about whether you allow parents to view the cameras or not. I'm not a huge fan, just because I don't think the quality always gives the right picture. However, for the school to monitor the classroom for training possibilities, for teacher mentoring, for the security of children in and out of the classroom, for reviewing the system if there is a question about what's happening in the classroom. There's some fantastic new technology that I'm hearing about that will allow AI to weigh in on the classroom with facial recognition of the interaction with the teacher and the child, with children being recognized as they come in and out of the classroom. So you're going to see more really cool things to come. But we believe that for insurance and licensing, and in some states, star rating purposes, that you'll continue to see in-classroom camera systems more important. That's another thing that's really just sort of necessary now. It's not a market differentiator anymore. Anything to add there, Phil?
I'm sure that these companies are weighing privacy concerns and confidentiality concerns as well. But I think to your point, Kathy, we will see the technology continue to improve and become more sophisticated and allow for more personalization of the experience. Yeah, great. Thank you. Meredith says the slides will be available for download in the details section after the close of the webinar. Thank you, Meredith. Let's take one more question. I saw a good one. Well, you mentioned specialty curriculum. What are some of the specialty curriculums dealing with free programs that the state is offering? Yeah, so they can be real market differentiators. I will just weigh in that there's a growing interest in language immersion and culture education. I think that is very often a market differentiator in that parents want a more global experience for their preschoolers and believe that the U.S. isn't quite as progressive as other countries in children learning multiple languages, which happens best at preschool ages. So I think if I'm right, and I'm not an expert, but I'll just say what I believe to be true, that if certain sounds and certain language aren't learned before 9 years of age, that they're really difficult to master. So I think there's a growing interest in that. Reggio and Montessori have always, not always, for a long time been more popular. More difficulty hiring, training, retaining those teachers at times because it's a niche and it has to have different training for teachers and different quality level. So, Phil, anything you've heard there on specialty curriculums? I know that we had a personal preference for the Montessori curriculum, so that was one that we liked in particular.
Okay. I am not renewing my VPK program. Do you think that is wise? I think it's very situational, so it's hard to say that in a vacuum. I think that they're also diverse, that I have to combine, when I consider that, multiple factors about the program itself, the landscape of other age groups, and the interest in parents in that area. So that's a really good question. Happy to dig in deeper with you on that. I think it's really hard to answer that question broadly. And then you guys answer this one, unless Phil happens to know. You guys pop into the chat. Are there any states or federal programs that support workforce training for for-profit centers? I believe that the answer to that is yes. And I want you guys to pop it into the chat because we're out of time. And this was such a rich conversation. I can't tell you how grateful I am to you, Phil, for your contribution and work in the industry on behalf of us all in learning how to run our businesses better, serve children, families, and teachers better. Thank you so much for that. Please take the survey to the right as your last tab. We take your comments very, very seriously. We pivot constantly based on you guys telling us what you like, what you like to see more of, what maybe didn't go so well. We are so happy to hear that as well. So thank you for that feedback. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Kathy.
See everyone soon.